Yo, what is up, Knights? Rick here, and in this guide video I'm going to be covering what I consider the top 5 do's and don'ts of Sirocco raid. As of making this video, I've cleared more than 80 Sirocco raids, and in that time I think it's safe to say that I've seen quite a few things go right, and conversely many that have gone horribly wrong. This guide of course will not be comprehensive or teach you anything about how the raid works or boss gimmicks or anything like that. Instead, it's more focused around some pivotal reminders that you should key in on in order to be successful in this raid. But of course, don't let my short list stop you from leaving more in the comments below. We'll be alternating between each, starting with number 1 do. So without further ado, let's go. Now, I know it's kind of weird that my first tip for my own Sirocco guide is basically telling you to go read other guides, but no, I'm serious. This is not a step-by-step how-to on the raid. Go check out a comprehensive guide on how this raid works. There are some great literature out there that is enough to get you started in understanding boss patterns and gimmicks. With how many people this raid requires and every party's importance in this raid, you're doing your whole raid a disservice by going in blind. And while I'll be the first to claim that reading a guide will do little in providing you with real-world experience, it certainly is better than nothing. I've left my own personal choices for good guides in the description below, and they've been more than helpful in at least getting my feet wet before I got to experience the raid firsthand. Now, if you're watching a video like this one, I can assume that you probably have a strong enough character for Sirocco raid in terms of gearing. I know we all talk about Cutline a lot and act like that's the goal you should strive for if you want to get into raid, but the way that I see it, the word Cutline to me means bare minimum. It screams to me that there is a hell of a lot more room for improvement, whether it be in gear optimization or flat out getting a better combination of gear. Quite frankly, you should never simply settle for Cutline gear. If you're doing Sirocco raid, that means you're obviously trying to improve your already admittedly strong gear. But always keep in mind that unlike all raids prior, Sirocco gear is only a supplement to improving your already existing gear. The gear you obtain here is not used to replace it. So in that sense, you should always be striving for better gear from things like 2+2 and Guide of Wisdom until you get a set strong enough to confidently put your Sirocco gear on. In this raid, you generally won't get much time for groggy phases. Instead, you'll do much of your damage outside of groggy, and the groggies that you do get are very short, if not extended by the time stop gimmick. Because of that, it makes it just that much more important that you are confident in your 25-second rotation whenever you're given the opportunity. Make sure that you front load most of your bigger hitting skills to ensure that you at least hit with those first. Now, with that being said, for this raid you need to be comfortable not only with your damage rotations, but also short burst windows as well. What I mean with that is slamming the boss with some of your hardest hitting skills in the very brief windows that you get outside of groggy. The general guidelines is that it has to be high damage, but also relatively safe to cast so that you aren't putting yourself in harm's way just to do damage. My striker, for instance, does most of her damage via a muscle shifted 1-inch punch and lightning dance whenever I get the opportunity. My brawler will always throw out a ground kick into Venom Mine. Install type skills are perfect for this after all. Basically, practice your character both in long groggies and short damage windows and be confident in both. There are a lot of potential reasons that you could be sandbagging your party or raid. Maybe you aren't prepared for the gimmicks and are spamming life tokens like crazy. Maybe you're just a bad player not playing your class correctly. Maybe your weapon is broken or you didn't bring any potions, cubes, or god forbid life tokens. Whatever the case, all these things can be avoided with a little bit of prep work beforehand. Guys, don't just jump into literally the hardest content in the game without checking that you have everything in order first. If you're actually new to the raid and unfamiliar or not confident with the gimmicks, then snitching on yourself is probably your best option, since it will eventually become painfully obvious that you don't know what's going on. It's far better that you let your party know beforehand so that they can prioritize keeping you alive and not simply assume that you know what you're doing. If you see a gimmick that you're not familiar with, then prioritize copying everyone else and take a second to assess the situation instead of just winging it. Keep yourself healed up with potions liberally, and if you die, it's not always necessary to instantly resurrect like you might in other content. Give your buffer a chance to resurrect you, and if not, maybe it's best to just spectate and observe for a little bit before coming back for the groggy. One other thing players probably hate the most are AFKers or deserters. Raids nowadays can take upwards of 30 minutes to complete depending on how everything goes, and all 16 raid members play a role. So make absolutely certain that you, and maybe more importantly your internet, can actually commit that amount of time before you even bother to apply to a raid. Generally, so long as the raid leader and parties are still attempting to clear, then you've got to keep going as well no matter how dire this situation looks. Basic things, guys, just don't be a sandbag, because I promise you it is a surefire way to get yourself blacklisted from all future raids. Now this tip is mostly geared towards raid leaders, but if you want to create a successful raid, then do yourself a favor and party up with no less than 3 friends that you can trust. Make sure that each of you are leaders of your own party, and in most situations, being together on Discord will go a long way in keeping the communication lines faster and safer. Doing this ensures that each party is filled with someone who knows the general strategy, and in my case, as long as it's someone I trust, I know that they're making sound decisions if they deviate from that strategy. Keep in mind that this is what most guild hosted static raids are doing, so you can join one with that expectation as well. Now that being said, if you aren't coordinating a raid, don't let that stop you from trying to join raids with your friends as a party instead. Personally, if I'm setting up a pub and you tell me that you have a party of 4 you'd like to join with, I'd be much more confident in your abilities than if you each applied individually, granted that you guys all still meet the gear requirements. On the topic of setting up parties, one problem I very often find with raid leaders is they generally stack the parties way too much. Don't get me wrong, the red and orange parties should be your strongest parties in the raid, since they are expected to do the hardest dungeons in the quickest amount of time for fast raid clears. But that being said, there will come a point where parties start becoming too stacked, and in turn may make your raid slower and more stressful as a whole, since there may be other parties that are underpowered despite there being plenty of power to go around. So with that concept in mind, make sure that you balance your power as appropriate. If you got power to spare in the red and orange parties, don't be scared to send one of those guys over to yellow or green. They could very well single-handedly carry that party, and conversely, adding someone weaker to a red or orange party wouldn't actually bring that power level down very much. Not to mention, it could give some people some much needed experience in doing all of the Sirocco dungeons that this raid has to offer, making them a much more versatile player with practice all around. One of these days, you may find yourself in the role of party leader for a raid, and when that happens, you want to be ready. If you're genuinely not, then simply let the raid leader know, but I think everyone should at least have some experience in it. The role of party leader isn't all that special, you basically just have 2 additional things to worry about. First, you need to know where you are expected to go, and make sound decisions when deviating from that strategy. This kind of experience comes naturally by simply doing enough raids and paying attention. Don't just let people taxi you places, know what dungeons you are going into and for what reason. Timing of when you enter dungeons is also pretty helpful. It's not always necessary to jump into dungeons immediately once they are available, for instance. Dungeons like Mirror of Trials and Subconscious Oblivion should actually be delayed slightly just to make the timing work out better. And the second responsibility of the party leader is managing the bullet time gimmick. To be completely honest with you guys, it's really not as big a deal as you might think. Quite frankly, aside from very few select situations, bullet time is mostly an option used to extend groggy phases and not for actually dodging gimmicks. The only time where I have to be considerate in using it is the hold attack in the Destroyed Gate dungeon, freeing people out of the ground from the Castle of Phantasm dungeon, and for less sword gimmick attack when you encounter him in the True Hall of Consciousness. For nearly every other time, you really should just use it to get an extended damage window on the boss. Now, under no circumstances should any of the 2 phases of this raid be allowed to reset. But avoiding this from happening must first come with an understanding of which dungeons cause each phase to boom, so let's talk specifics. In phase 1, after you clear the Dawn of Dreams dungeon, you will be opened into this screen. These 2 dungeons here are called the Mirror of Trials, and if any of them are not cleared within the time limit that they are spawned, the entire phase 1 will reset. These 2 dungeons will continue to respawn for the rest of phase 1, and thus will be a constant hindrance. Although managing these dungeons is a role for green and yellow parties, it's better to stop whatever you're doing to cover for people as necessary to avoid catastrophe. In phase 2, during the Sirocco boss fight, the Denial dungeon functions in exactly the same way. If it's not cleared within the time limit, phase 2 will restart from the beginning. So again, clear it to ensure this doesn't happen. But aside from these crucial dungeons, guys, there is yet another reason why some raids fail. A couple mechanics in Sirocco raid require coordination and communication to progress. These situations are mission critical that you get it right. Do not, under any circumstances, call out or kill anything unless you're confident in that decision. You could be giving misinformation or firing prematurely, which could have disastrous results. As I just mentioned, many guild-hosted Sirocco raids already have party leaders that are in voice chat with each other. So when in doubt, just leave it up to your party leader or raid leader to make the final decision on the next steps. Again, this is not a guide on how to do the raid, but I do want to point out these mission critical moments so you don't screw them all up. In phase 1, the first boss must be killed in a particular order that's based on how many orbs that he absorbs, or alternatively from the background music of the stage leading up to him. Kill the boss only when it's your turn, and use the raid minimap by hitting insert to get a better idea of when you should be going. In the actual Sirocco boss fight, the subconscious Oblivion dungeon initiates the groggy pattern on Sirocco, but you must only do so when the boss is aligned, also known as resonated, and all other parties are actively fighting the raid boss. Again, it's not enough that they're just in the dungeon, they must be actively in the Sirocco boss room as well. So make absolutely certain that you only go when you have communication from the other teams first. There is one particular 3-piece epic set that is miles above every other 100 epic set in terms of its utility in this raid, and that is the Vestiges of Excruciating Tragedy set. Odds are you might even have this set yourself, even if you aren't intentionally using it, but for this set to work in this raid, it has to be the full 3-piece set effect. If you have this set, then make sure to store it in your inventory during raid and let the raid leader know that you have it. The reason being is that this set is straight up broken against Sirocco. How the set works is that it takes off a percentage of total remaining HP after getting a certain number of hits against the boss. Of course, any class can abuse this, but the ones that have easy multi-hits perform the best. And to further elaborate, here are a few guidelines about the intricacies about this set. Fulfilling all of the different tiers of the set effect will shred up to 12.5% remaining HP from Sirocco via a bleeding effect. Now this 12.5% is a party-wide effect, meaning that having multiple people in the party wearing this set will not stack higher percent damage, but as far as I know, it does help in building the stacks faster. That being said, you can have 2 separate parties that can each proc their own 12.5% themselves. And lastly, because it works on remaining HP and not total HP, this set is best used when the boss has high levels of HP. Its effectiveness will go down drastically the closer that Sirocco is to dying. Swap into this set outside of Groggy, even if it breaks all of your other sets, then right before the Groggy is initiated, swap back into your real set to dish out proper damage. Doing this ensures that you shred her HP and still get a full rotation off. It's basically free damage if you care about this kind of stuff, which you should. My last tip applies mostly to everyone who is not in Discord. This makes it that much more important that the only form of communication with everyone else is going to be raid chat and the raid map. You never know what kind of issues other parties will have in their dungeons. They could wipe, have lag issues, whatever the case, things won't always go smoothly in a raid. In those situations, you want to be prepared to potentially cover for someone else, or maybe do an impromptu party or party member swap. Any number of things. If you're on autopilot or not paying attention, you could seriously cost the raid dearly. On that note, make sure that your raid chat is set up properly. I personally like to have my raid chat filter only what my raid, party, and general chat are saying. Literally everything else is turned off. This ensures I won't miss anything if someone decides to speak in a different channel. And lastly, keep your eyes peeled on the raid map by hitting the insert key. You can use it to retreat out of dungeon here, or just use it to monitor what the other parties are up to. For instance, I like to go into the subconscious Oblivion dungeon when I notice that the suppression team has just started to begin damaging their boss. And hey, one last thing about the raid map that I've got to thank Yukino for finding. Did you guys know that the location of Sirocco's final boss forms are not random? Well, to be more specific, after you identify where the first boss is, all of the boss locations for the rest of the raid will have been determined. The inner 3 dungeons rotate clockwise every time suppression is cleared, and it also has a chance to rotate after the Sirocco groggy phase. Pay attention to the minimap to see if it does or not, and knowing that, you can always go into the boss where you feel your party is most comfortable in surviving or doing damage in. Just thought I should mention it since I've heard all kinds of various info regarding this particular subject. But in conclusion, guys, here is a summary of my top 5 do's and don'ts of Sirocco raid. Again, like I said earlier, this isn't nearly enough to be successful in the raid itself, just things I thought you should keep in mind. Please let me know any additional ones in the comments below, and I will catch you knights later.